Hello, and welcome back to the AuDHD Teacher. I'm Emily, an early childhood teacher, sharing stories, science, and honest conversations about living with an AuDHD brain. So, whether this is your first episode or you've been here from the beginning, thank you so much for joining me. Now, before we dive in, just a quick reminder that this podcast shares my personal lived experiences alongside some general information. It's not intended to diagnose or replace medical advice. So, if you have any questions about your own health, please speak to a qualified healthcare professional. Now, have you ever looked back on your life and realized the clues were there all along? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Because after receiving my diagnosis, I found myself replaying my childhood memories, teenage years, university, and basically my entire career through a completely different lens. I wasn't actually looking for evidence and I wasn't trying to prove anything. Over time, I just started noticing more and more moments that I'd never understood before, and now they make sense. They were never really huge moments, they were just little moments, like little habits and little experiences that I'd always just thought were kind of personality quirks, but all of a sudden everything felt connected. And it's a strange feeling because nothing about my past has actually changed. My past is my past. All the events are exactly the same, but the meaning that I attach to them is now completely different. And that's something that I want to share and talk a bit more about today because you may not have the same stories as me if you're autistic or ADHD, and not everyone can relate to these stories, but I think it's good to have a different understanding about ourselves and be able to view things from a different lens because I think it changes the way that we see our own history. I can only squeeze so much into a podcast episode. But when I think back to my childhood, I think one of the first things people would usually say about me outside of my family is that I was a quiet little girl. So I heard that all the time. It's in all of my teacher reports that I was quiet, well behaved. When I'd go to friends' houses, the parents would say I was super polite and respectful. I was a pleasure to teach. And those things, they were completely true. I wasn't the child who would get sent to the principal's office. I never even got in trouble, barely ever got in trouble. I think maybe I got in trouble twice throughout my school years, and it was the most mortifying moment of my life. I was very good at following rules, and I was also very good at watching what everyone else was doing and trying not to draw too much attention to myself. But to everyone else and to me, I just thought that I was shy. But now, when I look back and I look at it from a different lens, I wonder if me being quiet was me just watching and observing and trying to learn the social rules around me by doing so. I know for many neurodivergent people, social situations don't always feel instinctive. And I don't think there was ever a moment where I said to myself consciously that I needed to copy and follow what everyone was doing. It was just quite subtle. I would always observe how kids joined into other people's games or how they spoke to teachers. Because I think, as I mentioned in another podcast, I was very quiet and well behaved. I didn't actually speak at all sometimes. I am exploring a bit of situational mutism because I didn't really speak at school, but I was constantly observing and watching how other people interacted with each other. And I don't even think it was fully conscious. Without even realizing it, I was just collecting all the information around me. And I guess just trying to figure out how everything worked. And I thought that that's what everyone did. And I guess we all do to some degree. But I think that this probably was one of my earliest cues that I would have been autistic. I also think school's another interesting one. Back in primary school, I was not smart at all. I was always in the lowest group for everything, lowest group for reading, maths, whatever. But I didn't fail so badly that it raised major red flags and that I needed extra help. I just kind of wasn't trying my best, sort of thing. And I think once I went through high school and things started getting more serious, I really forced myself to work a lot harder because I was really worried about the future. But I also had another interesting experience where I was always so bad at maths. I was in the bottom of maths. But when I was about year 10, I got a math teacher who explained alternative ways to do things. So instead of showing us one way to problem solve, she would show us two different ways, and I would always go for the alternative way. And I actually ended up getting my first excellence in maths, which was shocking to everyone because I'd always been terrible at it. And I think that moment, it really just shows that it wasn't me, it was the way I was being taught, and I wasn't dumb and I wasn't stupid. It was that teachers weren't actually explaining things in a way that I could understand. But I worked really, really hard. I always had to struggle through the systems, you know. I wasn't achieving top marks like everyone, but I wasn't failing bad. So again, I just flew under the radar. But it wasn't that I didn't like learning. I think there were things that I was really interested in, and I would dive headfirst and read about them, learn everything to know about them. So it really wasn't me being dumb at all. And it wasn't me not having that curiosity because I always wanted to learn and I always wanted to become a teacher as well. Like learning about learning, like that's literally the most perfect thing ever. And it's also one of the reasons why I did my master's degree. And I also wanted to show people around me that I wasn't dumb and that I could do it. It seems really silly to say it, but that is kind of half the reason why I did do my master's, because I wanted to prove to myself and everyone else that I was not stupid. But I also think another tricky thing about school is that it's not just the time that you're spending in the classroom doing your academic learning. There's a whole lot of other things that come into school. And I was actually listening to an audiobook the other day. I came across a term that really resonated with me, and it was the hidden curriculum. So, the hidden curriculum are all the things that are not in the actual school curriculum, but they happen like morning tea, afternoon tea, and lunch breaks. And then all the other things like athletics days and the things that you have to do as part of going to school. Some of the things that come into the hidden curriculum during lunchtime or break times could be, how do you know when it's your turn to join in a conversation? Or how long do you keep eye contact with someone? How can you tell when someone's joking or someone's serious? How do you know who to sit with at lunchtime? Because if you just went up to someone and sat with them, they might be like, "What on earth are you doing?" How do you make friends with people when everyone else already has a friendship group? And then how do you know when someone wants to start or end a conversation? All of these things are invisible, and most people just seem to pick them up naturally. But for me, it felt like everyone else had received this handbook that I somehow missed out on. And I had to observe people, watch them, and copy them to try and figure out the rules as time went on. I thought it was just a part of growing up, a thing that everyone had to do. I guess there were times when everyone felt uncertain about things, but I think I spent so much of my energy learning those hidden rules instead of being able to be a child. And again, it's not just social. If we think about things like athletics day, for example, I missed out on so many athletics days throughout my high school years because I refused to go. Same with school camps. I didn't go to my year 10 school camp because it is just awful. I didn't want to do things like that. You don't know what's going to happen. The routine is completely different to your school day routine. Everyone is together in one place. You've got the whole school. It's loud. For athletics day, especially, there's things like whistles, there might be music and cheering, there's people giving instructions, there's a lot of waiting around, heaps of uncertainty. And if you're not a sporty person or an athlete, you're having to do things that you're not comfortable with in front of a bunch of people who you probably don't really know or like, if I'm honest. And I know that they seem like tiny changes and little transitions, but for some people, they are really big, overwhelming things. And that's what would happen to me. And it explains so much now why, when we went on school trips as a child, I would always come home with a migraine. I used to hate school trips day because I knew at the start of the day that I would have a migraine and I'd feel ill all day because I didn't tell anyone that I had a migraine because, ugh, if I said anything, I would just be Emily causing a problem. So I would just hold it back and I'd be incredibly ill when I went home later. I have the migraines where I just feel nauseous and I vomit. So I dreaded school trip days or anything that was out of the usual routine because I knew that I would end up ill and I could never enjoy myself. And I just remember other children saying how much they loved the school trip days and they were enjoying themselves. And I always had such an awful time. And then because you're not in your usual routine, and especially at high school where everyone has different classes, your friends might not be in that particular class with you. So if you go on a school trip for one particular subject, there might be different people. And then how do you know who to sit with? How do you know who to talk to? I remember I did stage challenge at high school because I was a dancer, absolutely loved dance, but I only did it once, which was I think when I was year 12, and they would load us onto the bus from school to go to the theatre in our groups. So the group that I was with, the dancing group, we had a very small group and I didn't have any friends in my group. So we were loaded onto a bus with our groups. So I didn't have anyone to sit with. And I did have some so called friends, or I thought they were friends at that time in other dancers groups, but I was left sitting on my own on the bus and I couldn't see anyone else who didn't have anyone else to sit next to. So I sat there wondering what on earth was so wrong with me that nobody would even sit next to me. And I just had so many experiences like that growing up. There was nothing super obviously wrong with me from the outside, and I was friendly, approachable, but I just had so many of these moments and I could never figure it out for the longest time. And it was really painful as well. And it just used to baffle me because I never saw these things happen to other people. And I used to wonder how they would find somewhere to sit, how they would know how to join in the conversation, how they would know what to do in situations like this. And I just felt like I was stuck. And I think it's interesting now that I'm a teacher. I am a teacher in early childhood, but I do see some of these things play out today. And now that I have more of an understanding around it, I just find it super interesting that I actually recognize what's happening. And I think it's also a good reminder as a teacher, too. When we give instructions to children, it's a good reminder to ask ourselves, have we actually explained what's expected here? Or are we just assuming that people will automatically know if we don't give them the exact details? And I think that's really important to remember. We have so many unwritten rules in society, and how we expect children to just know this really baffles me. But it's also the same as adults. And I have experienced this through my time in university, as well as when I went out into the workforce on lunch break, for example. Are you supposed to eat on your own? What if you ask someone if you can join them, but they just say yes to be polite? How do you know? There are just so many social rules that are never spoken out loud, and it is beyond confusing. That's something I really struggled with as a student because I never knew how long to talk to other teachers for. And in my first year, I actually got in trouble because I hadn't spoken to a certain teacher for, I suppose, what was a perceived good enough amount of time. I don't know. I'm still genuinely confused about it to this day because I didn't have anything in common with this teacher. I would talk to her on the floor when we had to, but I didn't really speak to her in a conversational way. And it wasn't because I was being rude or unkind. I just genuinely didn't know how to speak to her and what to talk about. I was really stuck, but I didn't know that I was AuDHD at the time. So I really just thought something was very wrong with me. I think I spent so much energy trying to figure these rules out for my entire life. And so much energy was being used, and people, including myself, didn't realize that I was using this much energy. So the other day, when I heard about the hidden curriculum, it just made so much sense. And I was like, I can't believe I'm 30 and I'm only just finding out this term now because it's so true. And again, it gives me a lens to look back on my life and it makes things make sense. And I think that's where sometimes just having a name for your experience is really helpful because it makes you feel like you're not failing. You realize you're just navigating the system that's full of invisible expectations, and that is completely different. So, all of that is just another huge clue that I was neurodivergent. I also remember that I loved routines and predictability. I have always preferred to know what's happening, knowing what to expect, because unexpected changes throw me completely. To this day, at 30 years old, if something changes, and it can be something so small, like I was planning to make this thing for dinner and then we didn't have the ingredients, so I can't make that and I have to make something else, I will have a full-on crying meltdown because when things change, it's very, very overwhelming. And I like that predictability and I like that certainty. It makes things feel safe. And I've always been like that since a young child. And it was never me trying to be difficult. It's my brain already being prepared for something to go a certain way. And when it doesn't, it means that I have to mentally reorganize everything. And that is too hard sometimes. And that's something I often remind myself as a teacher as well, is that there can be so many other things happening underneath the surface. And it's not always what we're just seeing right in front of us, which again, it's a really important reminder to look beyond behavior. And I think that having my diagnosis, it hasn't only made me understand myself, which has been amazing, and I am so thankful for that, but it's also helped me become a better teacher because I'm able to look at things from different lenses and I'm able to put myself in children's shoes and try and imagine how they're experiencing the world around them. I do think that's a skill that not everybody has, and I think it's really important that we're able to do that. But back to my hidden clues, I think when I got older, things felt a bit more complicated because when you're in primary school, there's a very clear structure for the day. Even going to high school, the structure changes, but you still have structure slightly. But it is more stressful in terms of you're changing classes every hour, you're changing classroom, there's different people, a lot of things are happening. And also, social rules change the older you get. And I also went to an all girls school, so that was something different again. And I just always felt different. And it was nothing dramatically different. It was just different enough that it always felt like I was behind and I was just trying to catch up. But nobody from the outside could see it. Also, in high school, I know there tends to be a lot of cliques and a lot of groups. You're figuring out who are the cool people, and they all sit in their group, and then you've got all the different groups, and it's just a nightmare to navigate. I always say today, I would hate to go back to school. It would be awful. And when I was in high school, that was when things like Facebook started coming out. So it would be a lot worse now, I imagine. But, we have all those things to navigate as well. So not just the socializing at school, but then the socializing online outside of school as well. And I think because I felt like I'd missed this mystery manual that other people seem to have, I kind of observed people and I kind of built my own internal social rule book. And I just thought that that was something that everybody did. And now I realize it's not. So that's a big eye opener. I've also spoken about this in other podcasts, but I am incredibly sensitive to criticism. As I said earlier, I've probably only been told off a few times at school in my life, and it was absolutely mortifying. I am incredibly sensitive to criticism, and I'm not sure if it's part of RSD or if it's just a general part of being neurodivergent, but constructive feedback is probably one of the worst things ever. I do have a story early in my teaching career. First year teacher wasn't quite getting the support that I needed as a beginning teacher, but I did get some constructive criticism from my manager, and I almost tried to take my life that night because I felt like I was a failure. I felt like I'd done something wrong and there was no way to ever fix it, and I didn't know how to cope with that pain. Needless to say, I didn't. But I guess the point in me saying that is just to explain how to heart I take things and how highly sensitive I am to criticism. Even nice criticism, I still take it very to heart and I take it as a personal failure. Every time I get that kind of feedback, I suppose what my brain hears is you're not good enough. And it doesn't matter how many praises I get, how much positive feedback I get. If I get one constructive criticism, I have to work very, very hard to overcome that. So I try very hard to be perfect, and that's something I still have to work on every single day because I'm aware that no human is ever perfect. So I really don't know why we expect perfectionism. Don't ask me. But it makes it very difficult to celebrate anything I've achieved, to be honest. Because, like I say, no matter how many positive things I do, how many positive things I get, the one negative criticism will debunk all of those things and I will be back to square one. It does make me a little bit sad when I think back now, though, because I've experienced this throughout my whole life. And it's almost like the little version of Emily felt like she had to earn her right to belong. And that makes me really, really sad because nobody should have to earn their right to belong. Yet somehow I'm here to this day to tell the story. So when I actually started university to study to become an early childhood teacher, I really thought that everything was going to click into place because I was in an environment where other people wanted to do what I wanted to do. And I was so excited. It's like I'd been waiting my whole life to do this. I was so sure of my decision. But it did bring along challenges that I didn't expect. We had to do a lot of group assignments, which makes sense considering early childhood teachers work in a team, but there were a lot of things to navigate with that. Meeting new people all the time, presenting in front of big groups of people, navigating relationships with lecturers, which is very different to when you're in school, but then also your peers. I didn't make any friends at university, but I managed to get through. I found someone who I could sit with, and by the third year, I actually found a whole group of people I could sit with. We weren't friends, but I had somewhere to sit, and it didn't make me look like a complete outsider. So I managed, but I think it's important to remember that managing something doesn't mean that you found it easy. It kind of just means that I was very good at acting like I was coping, and I found it really, really difficult. And then also, having to do practicums as a teacher was really hard. I loved being with the children and I loved being engaged in their play, but I found all the other things around it really, really hard, especially navigating relationships with the other teachers. Like I have mentioned, the environment around me, they brought up challenges that I didn't expect to have. And I think at the time I didn't realize what was happening. I didn't realize what was hard about it. I just knew that something was hard. And because I had to work so hard and spend so much energy trying to navigate all these extra things, I was beyond exhausted. I was spending most of my day masking, and I had no idea that that's what I was doing at that time. I really thought I was just being professional and trying to fit in, but then also trying to be the person that everyone else around me wanted me to be. Because that was another thing. When I was a student, I was always told that I was too shy, I was too quiet, I needed to be louder. But I was told on one practicum that I wasn't paying enough attention to the louder children. And honestly, that made no sense to me because I don't know if I should say this, but my associate teacher at that time was the scariest lady I've ever met in my life. I was terrified of her as an adult. And I found it ironic because the quieter children, as she had said, looked like they were absolutely terrified of her. She didn't really interact with them much at all, and she interacted a lot with the loud children. Yet I was being told off for giving the quieter children too much attention, and I wasn't learning how to get along with the loud children. And I did, but I wasn't spending all my energy focusing on them because I know what it's like to be that other child. And now that I have many years of experience in the profession, I still think about that moment and I would love to go back to the teacher and really give her a piece of my mind. But I ended up completely ignoring who I was, what I needed, because I was so used to trying to fit myself into what everyone else was telling me to be. I was beyond exhausted, but I just had no idea at the time that that was the reason why. And that is another huge clue that should have shown me that I was neurodivergent. But I really just thought it was a personality flaw. I thought that I was a failure as a person. And even though I really struggled being a student through uni, when I graduated, I thought that maybe because now that I was actually qualified, I would get to go out and do what I loved every day. I had that ability to be creative and actually make long term relationships with the children I was teaching. And I really just tried to be quite positive about it. And while I have had many amazing experiences being a teacher. The other side that people didn't see was my mental exhaustion. I would spend my day trying to do the best that I could at what I did, focusing on the children, planning experiences, talking to my colleagues, remembering everything we have to remember during the day, managing transitions. If we think about a day in an ECE center, there are so many transitions that happen. And then also all the unexpected situations that come up because you never know. No amount of planning can stop the uncertainty and unpredictability of things that will happen in early childhood. I was having to deal with without knowing that I had AuDHD. So by the time I got home, my brain had run out of battery. All I ever wanted was to go into a dark room, lie down, and just have silence because my brain and my body could not take any more. It had nothing to do with me not liking my job. It was that my brain needed a chance to recover more so than other people. I still felt like I was processing things that happened 6 hours ago. At that time, I thought that it was because I wasn't coping. And I used to wonder how everybody else did it, how they'd still have the energy after all of that. And why was I not coping with it? And this was a really, really big clue for me. And I found myself constantly asking questions like, why does everything take so much energy? Why do I feel exhausted after doing things that I enjoy, even? And at that point, I was just asking myself these things, and ADHD and autism had never even crossed my mind. I really thought I just had anxiety and maybe I had some low mood issues. It did take me a long time to get from there to my diagnosis. But I will say that I am very, very thankful for my diagnosis. I think it is one of the best things that has ever happened to me. I know that some people are opposed to diagnosis because they think like, oh, you're just giving yourself a label. But that wasn't my experience. I think it allowed me to understand myself, which has been the best thing for me. And neurodiversity is awesome. I think that just like biodiversity, we need people who think differently. It's good for us to embrace those differences. And they're definitely not something to hide. I think there's something to understand because, like me, I understand myself so much more. And it's helped me to be who I am instead of this masked version that I pretended to be for so long. One thing I do want to say is I'm not saying that everyone needs a diagnosis because they definitely don't. I think that is how diagnosis has impacted my teaching. You know, the children that we teach, I see that they're not just learning the curriculum, for example. There are so many things that they're learning, and they're learning about themselves, they're learning about the world around them, and every interaction helps shape that story of them. And this is something that I'm so passionate about as an early childhood teacher because I want all children to grow up being confident in themselves and knowing that they're capable and that they're not a failure. As teachers, we have a really important role to play in helping build the story for children. It's important to remember that for ourselves as adults as well, because that understanding can help us with our own stories. And before we finish today's conversation, there is one thing that I do want to say. I think for a long time I did look back and wonder, how did everyone miss this? Like there were so many obvious clues, but it is important to remember that our understanding of neurodivergence and our understanding particularly of autism and ADHD have changed enormously over the last wee while. Information is changing every single day. We have so much more awareness. So many more people are talking about it. There's just so much more research being done, and we actually recognize it. And particularly for girls and women, we're realizing that it looks different for us. And I think that is a good thing to remember for myself, is that nobody intentionally overlooked any of this. We just didn't know. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'm really grateful that you've chosen to spend your time listening to this. If today's episode resonated with you, I would love it if you could follow that AuDHD teacher on whatever podcasting app you listen on. You can also find me on social media at that AuDHD teacher. And if today's episode made you think of someone, please consider sharing it with them. I think that just one conversation can make all the difference. But until next time, Keep being curious and compassionate. And remember, different doesn't mean broken, it simply means different. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.